Why was everyone failing? That question hung heavy in the air, thicker than the desert heat pressing against the reinforced walls of the underground range. 3 hours, 12 expert marksmen, not a single hit. The silence after each gunshot wasn't peace, it was humiliation. The crack of the .50 caliber echoed like judgment, followed by the dull thud of failure on digital screens. Numbers flashed red again. Missed target, 3,200 meters. No impact registered. Inside the control room, the Joint Alliance test had turned into an international embarrassment. American, British, Canadian, and European officers, each in their pristine uniforms, stood in uneasy silence, watching the failure unfold. They had gathered to witness the most advanced long-range precision rifle ever built, the Sentinel M50. A weapon designed to hit a human silhouette from nearly 2 miles away, and yet no one could make it work. Colonel Matthews stood in the center, hands clasped behind his back, face unreadable beneath the sterile white light. His voice, calm but cold, broke the tension. "Major Reynolds," he said, "we've had 12 shooters, no success. Why?" The British officer cleared his throat, frustration cracking through his composure. "Sir, the parameters are unrealistic. Simulated crosswind, fluctuating thermals, mirage distortion. Even an experienced sniper would." "Stop," Matthews interrupted. "The parameters reflect the real world. If the system can't perform here, it's useless out there." No one responded. They didn't have to. The truth was evident in the flicker of the digital displays. At the back of the room, half hidden behind a stack of equipment crates, a young woman took quiet notes on a tablet. Corporal Hannah Carter, Logistics Division. Her uniform, olive drab, standard issue, carried no distinction. She blended easily into the machinery, unnoticed, unimportant. But her eyes told a different story. They didn't dart around nervously like the other support staff. They moved with deliberate focus, tracing patterns through data that no one else was seeing. Wind, pressure, humidity, heat. Something wasn't adding up. "Technical recalibration complete, sir," the range officer announced. "Captain Miller, you're up." The American sniper, tall, confident, medals glinting, took position behind the rifle. Everyone in the room leaned forward. The moment was tense, hopeful. Maybe this would be the one. The captain exhaled, took his shot. Crack! A sharp burst of energy cut through the air, followed by a second of silence that felt like a minute. Miss. The readout flickered, off target by 1.3 meters. Close, but not enough, not even close to legendary. Someone muttered under their breath. "Damn it." A technician sighed, same deviation pattern. And in the corner, Hannah's brow furrowed. She wasn't looking at the shooter, she was looking at the wind simulation data. Numbers danced on the tablet screen. There was a rhythm, a repeating offset. Her eyes widened slightly. It wasn't random error, it was systemic. She hesitated, then leaned toward Lieutenant Harris, the American officer overseeing logistics. "Sir," she whispered, "the environmental simulation is outputting micro-turbulence patterns inconsistent with the targeting algorithm's compensation rate." Harris blinked, confused. "Excuse me." But before she could repeat herself, the room had gone silent again. The next shooter was preparing to fire, and her voice, barely above a whisper, had cut through the stillness. Every head turned toward her, including his Colonel Davenport, the British liaison officer, known for his sharp uniform and sharper disdain for anyone beneath his rank. His tone was a dagger wrapped in mockery. "Did someone from the box stacking brigade just question our targeting protocols?" A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. Hannah stiffened, realizing she'd spoken out of turn. "Sir, I only meant—" "Please," Davenport interrupted, "enlighten us with your vast experience in advanced ballistics." Matthew's gaze flicked toward her, Not angry, not mocking, just curious. "Corporal, what exactly are you noticing?" Her voice steadied. "The misses, sir. They're not random. There's a consistent displacement that correlates with the simulated thermal gradient. The algorithm compensates for density shifts, but it's calibrated for lower altitudes. The pattern indicates the targeting system isn't adapting correctly to high-temperature refraction." The room went still. Even the hum of the air circulation seemed to fade. Then Davenport's lips curled. "Well, that's fascinating. Perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your theory, Corporal Carter, since our experts seem to be struggling." Captain Wallace, the Canadian observer, shifted uncomfortably. "Colonel, I don't think." "No, no. Let's see what our logistics prodigy can do." Davenport's sarcasm was poison, but Matthews didn't stop him. "Fine," the colonel said after a pause. "One shot. Verification only. Then she returns to her duties." Hannah hesitated, then nodded crisply. "Yes, sir." The room broke into whispers, some amused, some curious. None believed she'd even know how to handle the weapon. She approached the rifle station slowly, but her movements were measured, confident, efficient. She didn't touch the digital targeting system. Instead, she reached for the manual scope adjustment. Major Reynolds frowned. "She's not using the targeting computer." "Of course she isn't," Davenport sneered. "She probably doesn't know how." But Hannah ignored him. She adjusted the reticle, checked the wind flags on the range display, and jotted something in a small notebook: quick calculations, margin corrections, timing intervals. Her fingers were steady, deliberate. Lieutenant Harris noticed her breathing pattern. 3 slow breaths, one held, release, textbook precision. The room quieted. Hannah's finger found the trigger. A single shot cracked across the range. The world held its breath. 2 seconds, 3, 4, then a metallic ping echoed from the distant target. Everyone froze. The digital readout turned green. Hit, center mass 3,200 meters. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then someone whispered, disbelieving, "That's impossible." Davenport stepped forward, face flushed. "Malfunction, the target's faulty." "Verification," Hannah said quietly. The range officer, pale and trembling, checked his console. "Confirmed, center hit, 100% accuracy." It was like gravity itself had shifted. The entire room stared at her, the invisible corporal who just done what 12 elite snipers couldn't. She placed the rifle back on its rest, calm, composed. "Technical verification complete, sir," she said, voice steady. "Permission to return to my duties." Matthews nodded slowly. "Denied. You'll return tomorrow, 800 hours, different conditions." "Yes, sir." As she walked back toward her station, whispers followed her like a shadow. "Who the hell is she?" "Lucky shot." "Had to be." Only Lieutenant Harris didn't look surprised. His eyes followed her, thoughtful. Because luck had rhythm, and what she just did, it had precision. Dawn arrived sharp and gold over the Nevada desert. Hannah stood outside the testing chamber at 0730, early as always. The sun had barely cleared the ridgeline, the sand catching its light in glittering waves. Inside, the room was quiet. The technicians moved with mechanical efficiency, their curiosity poorly concealed. "Morning, Corporal," Harris greeted, glancing up from a data terminal. "Sleep well?" "Yes, sir." "Any thoughts about yesterday's performance?" "Just basic principles, sir." "Basic principles," he smiled faintly. "You outshot 12 trained operators." She shrugged. Maybe they were relying on systems too much. Before he could answer, the officers began to file in. British, American, Canadian. The entire room seemed subtly rearranged around her presence. Colonel Davenport's entrance cut through the murmur like a blade. His tone dripped with sarcasm. "Our logistics miracle returns. ready for another divine intervention. Hannah stood straight, ready for duty, sir. Matthews entered last. His expression was unreadable, but there was weight behind his gaze. Today, new parameters, he announced. No simulations, real conditions. Technicians wheeled in a new rifle platform, heavier, more traditional. The Barrett XM500, no electronic compensation, natural wind, natural visibility, real targets. Rain, fog, wind, morning light scattered across the field outside, the real world unfiltered. Davenport smiled thinly. No digital wind flags today, Corporal. Hannah looked at the monitor feed of the outdoor range, scanning tree lines, dust patterns, and subtle shifts in light. Tree movement along the field will serve as natural indicators, she said quietly. The room went silent again. Matthews gave a curt nod. Proceed. Hannah approached the rifle. She moved differently now, deliberate, grounded. She checked the bolt, the ammunition, the trigger pull. Her breathing settled into rhythm. Captain Wallace leaned toward Harris. She's adjusting for the terrain. She's reading the wind, Harris murmured. Old school technique. Hannah looked through the scope. The world beyond the glass compressed into a single frame, a shimmer of mirage, distant hills, invisible crosswinds. Her calculations weren't numbers anymore. They were instinct. She waited for the breath between gusts. Then one smooth trigger press. The shot cracked through the chamber. 4 seconds later, another ping. Center mass. Silence fell again, heavier than before. Confirmed hit, the technician whispered. 2,800 meters, direct center. Hannah stood, secured the rifle, and faced the officers. Observation, sir. Matthews gestured for her to continue. The Barrett and Sentinel have different recoil impulses. Operator adaptation isn't accounted for in your testing protocol. The system measures mechanical accuracy, not human integration. A murmur swept through the observers. Even Davenport was silent for a long beat. Finally, he stepped closer. Who are you really, Corporal Carter? She met his eyes without flinching. Just someone who respects the fundamentals, sir. But behind her calm expression, her pulse was steady for another reason. Somewhere deep within the concrete walls, a silent phone vibrated with a secure message waiting for her eyes only. Maintain cover, verification in progress. She'd just rewritten what every soldier in that room believed about skill, technology, and limits. And no one, not even the ones watching her most closely, had any idea why she was really there. Why was security waiting for her? The question hit Hannah the moment she stepped into the logistics bay the next morning. 2 armed guards blocked the doorway, not casual, not routine. Full kit, low-ready posture, eyes hard behind mirrored lenses. Corporal Carter, the senior one said, tablet in hand. You're to report directly to briefing room A. Colonel Matthews's orders. Hannah didn't blink. Yes, Sergeant. The younger guard shifted, uneasy. Everyone in the corridor knew what that kind of escort meant. Investigation, suspicion, containment. But Hannah moved as if this were just another assignment, her steps measured, her breathing slow. They walked past rows of glass offices and digital displays, through a building humming with whispers. People paused mid-conversation as she passed, technicians, analysts, even officers who usually never noticed logistics staff. Curiosity followed her like a storm cloud. The woman who had made the impossible shot was now the woman under scrutiny. Inside briefing room A, the air was heavy with anticipation. The long table had been cleared except for a few folders and live security feeds on the walls. Colonel Matthews sat at the head, his expression unreadable. To his right, Colonel Davenport, red-faced, coiled tight with barely contained anger. 2 civilians in tailored suits occupied the far side. Intelligence. Lieutenant Harris stood near the back wall, arms folded, face carefully neutral. "Corporal Carter," Matthews said, motioning to the empty chair across from him. "Please sit." She did, posture perfect, gaze steady. "I assume you understand why you're here," Matthews began. "I believe so, sir." Davenport leaned forward. Two perfect shots under controlled and uncontrolled conditions. No documented sniper training. No advanced marksman certification. So either you're falsifying records or you're lying about who you are. Hannah said nothing. The silence stretched. The American intelligence officer slid a folder across the table. "Your service record shows 3 undocumented months last year. No duty station, no leave forms, no activity logs. Explain." "Specialized training, sir," she replied evenly. "What specialized training is classified for a logistics corporal?" Davenport snapped. "With respect, sir," she said quietly, "that information requires clearance above this level." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Matthews's gaze sharpened. The two civilians exchanged a look, calculation, not surprise. "You expect us to believe," Davenport said, voice rising, "that there exists a program so secret we don't know about it." "I expect nothing, sir." Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but classified means classified. For a moment no one spoke. The hum of the ventilation filled the space. Then Lieutenant Harris's voice came from the back, hesitant, thoughtful. "Sir, her father, Robert Carter, Marine Corps sniper instructor, transferred to Special Operations before 2015. Silver Star posthumous." Hannah's composure faltered for the first time. Just a flicker, eyes lowering, breath catching. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. Matthews leaned back, studying her. The revelation changed something in the room. Anger shifted to curiosity. "So the skill is inherited," Davenport said bitterly. "That still doesn't explain why she's outperforming professionals." "Maybe it does," Harris countered softly. "Some lessons never die." Matthews exhaled. "All right, Corporal. Until we verify your record, you're restricted to quarters, effective immediately." "Yes, sir." She stood, saluted, and turned to leave. The guard by the door moved to follow. Davenport's voice stopped her. "We will find out who you really are." She didn't look back. "I'm counting on it, sir." Her quarters were small, a metal desk, a single bunk, and a window overlooking the desert. When she entered, she noticed the details immediately. Items shifted by millimeters, drawers opened then carefully reclosed, the faint smell of solvent. A search. Expected. Her phone was gone. She sat on the bed, hands folded, heartbeat steady. Everything was moving faster than predicted. Then a knock, sharp 3 beats. A young private stood in the hall holding a sealed envelope. "Delivery for you, Corporal." He looked terrified. Hannah accepted it with a nod, closed the door, and examined the paper. No markings, no seal. She held it up to the light, checked for sensors, then opened it carefully. A single card inside, typed message. "Maintain current protocol until 800 tomorrow. Stand by for new instructions. Confirmation code, Sierra Echo 7729. Her eyes softened. The code was valid, authentic Joint Special Ops cipher. So the mission wasn't compromised, not yet. She burned the card piece by piece in a metal ashtray, crushed the ashes, flushed them down the toilet. Then she sat back on the bed and closed her eyes. For a long time she listened to the silence, the hum of air conditioning, the faint steps of guards outside. It reminded her of the ranges back home in Montana, when her father's voice used to echo over the wind. "Respect the wind, Hannah. Don't fight it. Learn its rhythm. It'll tell you what to do." She opened her eyes again. The wind was always speaking. Most people just didn't listen. Tomorrow she would. Dawn broke hard and bright, slicing across the desert like a blade of gold. At 800, a guard returned her phone. It buzzed almost instantly, a secure text from an encrypted source. Assessment protocols approved. Perform consistent with cover story parameters. Maintain discipline. She typed one letter back, A acknowledged. At 900, she was escorted to the main range, transformed overnight. Multiple stations, different rifles, different conditions. Every officer who had questioned her was there, spectators now. Matthews stood at the center. Corporal Carter, today you will undergo a comprehensive skills assessment. Multiple weapon systems, multiple scenarios, no preparation time between stations. Yes, sir. The objective, he continued, is to evaluate the consistency and nature of your marksmanship capabilities. Understood. He nodded to the range officer. Begin. The first station, the M110 semi-automatic sniper system, target moving laterally at 800 meters. Hannah approached the weapon confident but measured. She ran a function check, then settled behind the scope. Her first shot was wide by design, grazing the outer ring. Her second improved. By her fifth, she was hitting consistent center mass groupings. Observers murmured approval. Competent, talented, not supernatural. The next station, Mk13 Mod 7, 1,600 meters, simulated crosswind. Then M486, rapid multi-target engagement. Then limited visibility. Each time she repeated the same pattern, a believable progression from good to great, never perfect. A rhythm designed to tell a story. Disciplined civilian training, not secret operator experience. 2 hours in, sweat beaded on her forehead. Not from effort, from precision. Every movement had to look natural, every success calibrated, every miss deliberate. From behind the observation glass, Davenport muttered, "Too consistent. No one adapts that quickly." Actually, Harris said, that's exactly how experienced civilian marksmen perform. They learn fundamentals early. They read conditions, not systems. Davenport frowned but said nothing. Final assessment, Matthews announced. A new console lit up. A simulation, urban environment, multiple threats, civilian presence. Unlike the others, this test wasn't about accuracy. It was about judgment. Standard row, Matthews said. Identify threats, protect noncombatants, achieve mission objectives. Hannah stepped forward. She trained simulations like this hundreds of times in far less controlled environments, but she had to play the role, not the expert, the learner. The cityscape flickered to life on the screen. She moved her digital avatar carefully, scanning corners, distinguishing civilians from hostiles. She fired when necessary, hesitated when she should. A few mistakes, believable ones. Saving civilians over mission efficiency. Tactical empathy, not cold precision. When the test ended, her score appeared, 85th percentile. Exceptional for a logistics specialist, imperfect for a covert operative. Exactly what she wanted. 20 minutes later, she stood outside in the waiting area, hands clasped behind her back. Through the one-way glass, she could see them, Matthews, Davenport, Harris, and the intelligence officers reviewing data. Their expressions shifted from suspicion to confusion. When the door opened, Matthews's tone was formal but no longer cold. "Corporal Carter, your performance is consistent with extensive civilian training from an expert instructor. However," he paused, glancing at the civilian in the dark suit, "certain tactical indicators suggest familiarity with advanced protocols." The man in the suit stepped forward. His presence filled the room without effort. "Colonel, if I may." Matthews nodded. "Corporal Carter," the man said, voice smooth but firm. "I'm Mr. Pearson, Defense Intelligence Agency. Your clearance has been verified. Effective immediately, you are released from current operational constraints." Davenport frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" Pearson didn't look at him. "Verification code, Captain." Hannah's eyes flicked once, the smallest tell. Echo Tango 5591 Zulu. Confirmed, Pearson said. The room froze. Matthews's eyes widened slightly. Davenport's jaw slackened. Captain Carter, he repeated. Hannah's posture shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Shoulders squared, chin lifted, gaze direct. Yes, sir. Pearson faced the others. Captain Hannah Carter, United States Marine Corps, Force Reconnaissance, assigned under deep cover to evaluate cross-functional integration within the Joint Alliance Range Program. The silence that followed was total. Davenport's face drained of color. You mean we were being tested? Pearson nodded. All of you. Matthews exhaled slowly, realization dawning. So the program wasn't about the weapon, it was about us. Hannah met his gaze. About how we work together or fail to. She said it without pride, without triumph, just quiet truth. Pearson continued. Captain Carter's cover as logistics personnel allowed unfiltered observation of team dynamics, leadership behaviors, and over-reliance on automated systems. Her results speak for themselves. Davenport looked as if the floor had dropped out beneath him. You deceived senior officers. Hannah met his anger calmly. To reveal blind spots that were killing performance, sometimes truth requires camouflage. Matthews studied her, then nodded slowly. Understood. Continue your assessment tomorrow. Full disclosure briefing at 900. As the officers dispersed, the air crackled with disbelief and reluctant respect. Harris lingered near the doorway. You knew this would happen, he said softly. I suspected. He smiled faintly. Was any of it real, the shots, the tests? She looked at him steady, unguarded. All of it was real, just not all of it was what it seemed. That night, in the privacy of her quarters, Hannah removed the logistics insignia from her uniform. The fabric still smelled of gun oil and desert dust. From a locked case beneath her bunk, she withdrew her true credentials, laminated ID, encrypted flash drive, mission orders. Captain Hannah Carter. Force Recon Ghost Team. Special Operations Integration Division. She studied her reflection in the mirror. The same face, the same steady eyes, but the woman staring back no longer had to pretend to be invisible. Tomorrow, the world would know who she really was. And more importantly, why she'd come here. Her father's words returned again, quiet and certain. Precision isn't about hitting the target, Hannah. It's about understanding every force that tries to make you miss. She smiled, small, resolute. Tomorrow, those forces would meet their match. Why did the truth feel heavier than any rifle she'd ever held? The next morning, Hannah woke before dawn. She didn't move at first, just lay still, eyes open, feeling the hum of the facility through the walls. The sound was different now. Yesterday, it had been a cage. Today, it was a stage. At 700, a message pinged on her secured device. Proceed as planned. Full operational autonomy granted. She exhaled slowly. No more cover, no more pretending to be invisible. By 8:55, the conference room was full. Officers from 6 allied nations sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces a mix of curiosity, confusion, and barely disguised resentment. Colonel Davenport sat stiffly across from an empty chair. Colonel Matthews reviewed notes in silence. The hum of ventilation filled the space like anticipation itself. The door opened. She walked in, same woman, new gravity. Her uniform no longer bore the logistics insignia. Now it displayed the silver and crimson of Force Reconnaissance, the subdued qualification badges of an elite marksman, and the posture of someone who no longer needed permission to speak. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Even the most skeptical faces went still. Colonel Matthews broke the silence first. Gentlemen, he said formally, allow me to properly introduce Captain Hannah Carter, Force Reconnaissance, United States Marine Corps. The words hit like an impact round. Even the air seemed to shift. Davenport's face drained of color. He looked down instinctively, as if the ground might explain what his pride couldn't. Hannah met every gaze without flinching. "Good morning," she said softly, not commanding but certain. The quiet power in her voice drew more attention than a shout ever could. She placed a small flash drive on the table. "I owe you an explanation." The man in the dark DIA suit, Pearson, stepped forward. "For the past 3 months, the program you've all participated in has been a controlled cross-functional evaluation, authorized at the highest levels of Joint Command." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You believed you were testing weapon systems. In reality, you were being evaluated on integration, how allied teams function under pressure when hierarchy, technology, and ego collide." Murmurs rippled through the room. A few officers stiffened. Davenport looked ready to explode. Matthews's tone was calm but sharp. "This entire operation was approved above my level." "Yes, Colonel," Pearson replied, "and Captain Carter was assigned as the embedded evaluator." Hannah took a breath. "My role was to observe not the weapon but the people, how you adapt, how you treat support staff, how you respond when systems fail." She turned slightly, her gaze moving across the faces at the table. Leaders, tacticians, commanders, all trained to control the narrative. But for once, none of them spoke. She continued, "Every miss at 3,200 meters had one thing in common, not the rifle, not the wind. Dependence. Everyone trusted the system more than themselves." She gestured toward the projection screen, where real-time data from the previous tests appeared. Graphs, shot groupings, telemetry lines. "When the algorithm miscalculated density gradients," she said, "no one questioned it. Every team trusted the technology blindly. Not one shooter adjusted manually. Not one." Captain Wallace leaned forward, voice low. "Except you." Hannah nodded, "Because technology is a tool, not a crutch." Her eyes softened. "My father taught me that." That quiet sentence changed the tone again. The data on the screen wasn't just numbers anymore. It was a mirror showing them their dependence, their complacency, their hierarchy of pride. Pearson stepped in. Captain Carter's observation led to a series of controlled demonstrations. Her so-called lucky shots were deliberate triggers. Each was designed to reveal systemic vulnerabilities in current Allied operations. Davenport's jaw tightened. "You humiliated your allies under false pretenses." "No, sir," Hannah replied evenly. "I reminded them what happens when arrogance replaces fundamentals." The words hung there, sharp and heavy. Davenport looked away first. Colonel Matthews broke the silence. "Let's continue." Hannah inserted the flash drive. The screen shifted to new data, performance metrics from every team, overlaid with her notes. "Across all national teams," she explained, "performance degraded by 40 to 70% when electronic systems malfunctioned or miscalibrated. In every case, shooters trusted faulty readouts over their own eyes." She tapped the remote. A replay appeared of the Sentinel M50's simulated target sequence, digital windage lines glowing bright blue. When the thermal layer shifted, the system compensated for the wrong variable. Visual indicators contradicted the data, yet not one operator disengaged automation. Hannah turned toward the officers. "You saw perfection on your screens but chaos on the field, and you trusted the screen." The silence was absolute. "The Sentinel M50," she continued, "is an incredible platform, but it's designed to work with human instinct, not instead of it. The system failed because the people using it forgot what it means to think." Captain Wallace nodded slowly. "So your first shot wasn't luck?" She gave a faint smile. "No, sir, it was proof of concept." Matthews leaned forward, his voice measured. "And your second?" "That one," Hannah said softly, "was proof of principle." A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the room. quickly fading into introspection. Even Davenport said nothing this time. When her briefing concluded, the weight in the air had shifted. It was no longer defensive tension, it was realization, a collective recognition of something uncomfortable but necessary. Matthews broke the silence. "You've made your point, Captain, but I need to understand one thing. Why go to these lengths? Why deception?" Hannah's expression softened. "Because truth doesn't survive rank." He frowned. "Explain." "When you tell people directly that their systems are broken, they defend them. But when you show them, when they experience failure firsthand, they remember. The lesson sticks." Her voice lowered, almost a whisper. "The lesson my father died for." Matthews's eyes narrowed. "Your father?" She nodded. "Major Robert Carter, Marine Corps Special Operations. Operation Silent Horizon 2015. His unit relied on faulty targeting software during a night extraction. The system glitched. They hesitated to override it manually. 3 men died. My father was one of them." No one spoke. Even Davenport's expression softened slightly, the anger fading into quiet understanding. "He taught me," she continued, "that technology is only as good as the human behind it. Respect the weapon, respect the wind, respect the fundamentals, because one day when everything else fails, that's all you'll have." Her words lingered in the stillness, not as accusation but as memory. Matthews finally nodded. "Message received, Captain." But Pearson wasn't done. "Gentlemen, Captain Carter's evaluation will continue for 72 more hours. During this time, she'll lead Phase 2 integrated training across mixed national units. Her findings will form the foundation for a revised joint operations doctrine." The announcement sent another murmur through the room. This wasn't just an experiment anymore. It was evolution. "Captain Carter," Matthews said, voice steady, "you'll have full command of the range." She saluted. "Understood, sir." As the meeting adjourned, chairs scraped, conversations rose in cautious tones. Some officers looked at her with respect, others with unease. Davenport avoided her gaze altogether. When the room finally cleared, only Harris remained. He approached quietly. "You handled that better than anyone could have." She gave a faint smile. "It wasn't about handling, Lieutenant. It was about reminding." "Reminding who?" "Everyone," she said, "including myself." Later that evening, Hannah stood alone in the observation bay overlooking the range. Below, teams were already reconfiguring under new protocols, integrating logistics, technical and tactical personnel. The sound of voices filled the air, orders, questions, laughter. The tension was gone. Something new was forming: cohesion. Harris joined her again, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "You think this will stick?" "If it doesn't," she said quietly, "then everything that came before means nothing." He leaned against the railing. "Davenport not taking this well." "He'll come around." Harris smirked. "You sound confident." She sipped her coffee. "He's proud, not blind. Pride's easy to challenge when data proves you wrong. Blindness, that's harder." She turned toward the horizon. The desert was bleeding gold into violet, the sky wide and indifferent. "He'll see it eventually." Harris studied her for a moment. "You planned this from the start, didn't you? The entire setup?" She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was calm. "Sometimes, the only way to fix a system is to let it fail in front of everyone watching." He nodded slowly. "That's ruthless." "It's necessary." She glanced at the range again. "Tomorrow we start rebuilding, not just equipment, people." Harris smiled faintly. "You ever think you're too idealistic for this line of work?" She looked at him, that same calm, unwavering stare. "Idealism is just discipline with a heartbeat." That night, long after the lights dimmed and the corridors emptied, Hannah sat at her desk writing her preliminary report. Each keystroke was measured. Objective, factual, detached, but beneath every sentence there was pulse and grief. She stopped once, staring at the digital cursor blinking in silence. Then she whispered to the empty room, "You were right, Dad. Fundamentals never lie." Outside, the desert wind rose soft, shifting, alive. The same wind that once carried a father's lesson now carried its echo through steel and concrete. Somewhere in that silence, a transformation had begun, not in the weapons, not in the systems, but in the people learning how to trust themselves again. And it had started with one impossible shot, made by the woman everyone thought didn't belong. Why did they follow her in silence? That morning the desert felt different, not quieter, just listening. Dust curled around the boots of soldiers standing in formation under the rising sun. The wind carried faint traces of oil, sweat, and anticipation. 3 national teams, 24 personnel, all waiting for orders from the woman who wasn't supposed to lead them. Captain Hannah Carter stepped forward, her shadow cutting long across the sand. "Morning," she said simply. No salute followed, no chorus of "ma'am," just wary eyes, uncertain faces. Men and women who had seen combat, who had lost people, who weren't used to being led by someone whose legend had been born in rumor and one impossible shot. She didn't blame them. "Today's objective is simple," she said, her tone even unpretentious. "You'll work as one unit, no national boundaries, no rank divisions, one mission." Davenport's voice cut through the line. "And who decides that mission, Captain? You." She met his gaze. "No, sir, the terrain does." A murmur rippled through the ranks. Some smirked, some frowned, others just listened. Hannah turned toward the range. "You'll be dropped at 3 coordinates. Natural terrain, mixed targets, limited comms. You'll have 1 sniper, 1 spotter, 2 support elements, 1 medic. No automated targeting systems. No drones. No satellite uplink. Only your senses, your coordination, and your fundamentals." One of the younger soldiers raised his hand. "What's the goal, ma'am?" She looked at him for a long moment. "To remember you're human." That earned a few nervous laughs, but the kind that hid unease, not amusement. "Start prepping," she ordered. "You have 15 minutes." 15 minutes later, the convoy rolled out, 3 trucks kicking up spirals of dust as they cut through the empty plain. Hannah rode in the lead vehicle with Lieutenant Harris and Sergeant Vega, a quiet, sharp-eyed medic from the Canadian unit. No one spoke for a while. The engine filled the silence. Harris finally broke it. "You really think they'll cooperate out there?" "They'll have to," she said, eyes on the horizon. "The environment doesn't respect uniforms." Vega glanced at her. "That's poetic, ma'am." "It's true," Hannah replied softly. "And poetry doesn't win wars, people do." The terrain grew harsher as they reached the drop zone, dry ridges, sun-bleached rocks, heat shimmer dancing like ghosts. Hannah stepped out first. The sun was merciless, but her focus was absolute. She set up the command node, a simple folding table, analog maps, no digital overlays. The teams fanned out. Some moved with efficiency, others hesitated, glancing toward her as if expecting hidden tricks. She ignored it. Leadership wasn't about convincing. It was about proving. Over the next 3 hours, the range became a living organism. Voices over static-filled radios, bursts of gunfire, shouted coordinates. The first hour went poorly. Miscommunication, duplicate commands, a missed target that nearly triggered a false kill signal. Hannah listened, analyzing without intervening. At one point, Harris looked frustrated. "You're letting them fail." She nodded. "Failure teaches faster than instruction." "But morale? They won't respect orders until they see the cost of not following them." Her voice wasn't harsh. It was weary, like someone who had already seen what pride could destroy. By noon, tempers had started to crack. Davenport's unit clashed with Captain Wallace's team over protocol. Voices rose over the comm. Accusations. Blame. Hannah stepped to the mic. "Range 1, stand down." The line went silent. Then her voice came again, calm, but unmistakably commanding. Captain Davenport, Captain Wallace trade positions. Effective immediately. What? Davenport's voice exploded over the radio. That's not. Order acknowledged, she interrupted. Static, then reluctantly, acknowledged. Harris glanced at her. You're making him a spotter. Sometimes, perspective changes faster when you're behind the scope, instead of barking from behind the line. She turned, scanning the field through binoculars. He'll see more from there than he ever could from his pride. By 1400 hours, something began to shift. The chatter on the radio softened, the rhythm changed, communication became clearer, shorter, human. For the first time, the mixed teams began to operate like one. At one point, Hannah took a field rifle and joined a team directly, spotting for a young operator from Norway. The girl's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her sight. Relax, Hannah said quietly. You're not fighting the rifle, you're dancing with it. The girl smiled nervously. I don't dance well. You will, Hannah murmured. Listen to the wind. She didn't correct her aim, she corrected her breathing. And when the girl finally squeezed the trigger, the shot rang clean. A hit. The relief in her eyes said everything. Harris, watching from a distance, whispered under his breath, That's how you lead. By sunset, the teams were exhausted, dirt-streaked, dehydrated but different. The radio silence wasn't tension anymore, it was reflection. They failed, adapted, recovered, together. At the debriefing tent, Hannah didn't stand at a podium or behind a table. She stood among them. You learned something today, she said. Not about shooting, about listening. Someone muttered, listening to what? The space between chaos and command, she replied. That's where instincts live. A long pause followed. Then Davenport, still dusty, sunburned, humbled, spoke. You made your point, Captain. Hannah tilted her head. Which one? That I needed to stop talking long enough to hear someone else think. A few chuckles rippled through the group, but behind them was respect, quiet, reluctant, real. Later that night, Hannah stood outside the tent, the desert air cool and sharp. Harris approached with 2 canteens. Not bad for day one, he said. She smiled faintly. They stopped seeing uniforms, that's a start. You think Davenport's a lost cause? No, she said softly. He just forgot what it's like to lose something that matters. Harris studied her. You sound like you've been there. She didn't answer right away. The wind moved her hair gently across her face, carrying grains of dust that glittered under the moonlight. When you lose something in combat, she said finally, you don't lose it once. You lose it every time you close your eyes. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. That night she dreamed. She was back in the mountains of Afghanistan, the cold biting through her gloves, the world painted in night vision green. Her father's voice crackled in her headset. Steady, calm, the voice she always trusted. Wind 1.3 west, 2 seconds between gusts, just half a mil left. She took the shot, it hit. But then the horizon exploded, fire, dust, chaos. The targeting system glitched, red flashing data filling her eyes. Her father's voice gone mid-sentence. Silence, then static, then nothing. She woke gasping, sweat cold against her skin. It took her a full minute to realize she was back in Nevada, alive, safe, surrounded by walls instead of mountains. But the silence after the dream still felt like loss. At 600, she returned to the command post earlier than anyone. She stood alone, watching the range bathe in pale morning light. A shadow approached behind her, Davenport. Couldn't sleep either, she asked quietly. He hesitated, never could after a loss. She nodded, eyes still on the horizon, then were the same kind of tired. He studied her for a moment, his tone softer than she'd ever heard it. You were right, Captain. I rely too much on systems, maybe because I'm afraid of failing without them. She looked at him, steady, understanding. Failure isn't the enemy, Colonel. Denial is. He exhaled, the weight of years in his breath. So what happens now? Now we train until instinct feels like truth again. By mid-morning, something remarkable had changed. The teams moved with cohesion, no national lines, no ego, just coordination. The mixed accents on the radio blended into one language, purpose. When the second live test began, the results were undeniable. Hits at 2,800 meters. Perfect synchronization between spotter and sniper. Zero communication breakdowns. Matthews, watching from the control room, murmured to Pearson, "She's done in 2 days what we couldn't do in 2 years." Pearson's answer was quiet. "That's because she's not teaching them how to shoot, she's teaching them how to believe." That night, as the teams celebrated quietly around campfires on the far side of the range, Hannah sat alone on a dune. The desert stretched infinite, silent. The stars were sharp enough to cut through thought. She pulled a small photograph from her pocket, faded, worn. Her father in uniform, smiling beside a girl no older than 8, holding a .22 rifle half her size. "Precision is respect," his voice echoed in memory. "Every bullet, every breath, every decision, respect what it can change." She looked at the picture for a long time before whispering, "I'm still trying, Dad." A gust of wind lifted sand around her like gold dust in the dark. She closed her eyes and let it pass over her face. Because sometimes silence wasn't emptiness. It was memory. And memory was the only thing that could teach without words. Why did the air suddenly go quiet? It happened just after midday. The range had been alive a moment earlier, gunfire echoing across the desert, commands sharp over comms, radios crackling with confidence. Then, without warning, it all stopped. Static filled the speakers in the command post. The faint hiss of wind replaced all voices. Hannah froze. "Range control, this is command. Report." "Nothing." Team Alpha, respond. "Silence." Team Bravo, check in. A burst of interference, then a garbled voice. "Down signal med-evac," and it cut off again. Her pulse steadied, not racing. Experience had burned the panic out of her years ago. She turned to Harris. "What's their position?" "Grid C9, ma'am, North Ridge Line. Elevation 2,200 feet, but the relay tower's out, we lost visual feed." "Vehicle ready." Harris nodded, already waiting. She grabbed her helmet. "Let's move." The truck slammed across uneven ground, dust boiling in its wake. The radio crackled, useless. In the back, Vega, the medic, checked his kit, expression tight. "What do we know?" she asked. "Minimal," Hannah said. "Interference hit the entire north sector. Could be environmental, could be man-made." "Training exercise?" Vega asked. "Not anymore." The desert blurred past, ridges, scrub, heat shimmer. Every bump sent memories rattling through her chest. Other convoys, other missions, voices she could still hear. She forced them down. "Focus." They reached the ridge within minutes. Smoke curled above the rocks, not thick but wrong, not simulation smoke. Chemical, real. Hannah was out before the truck stopped. "Perimeter," she barked. "Harris, establish comms, Vega with me." They moved fast, weapons up, eyes scanning. Over the ridge, the scene came into focus. One of the range's armored transports lay half-rolled against a boulder, its tires shredded, windshield spiderwebbed with impact cracks. 2 soldiers knelt beside it, one bleeding heavily from the leg. Vega dropped to the ground beside him, already pulling gauze and tourniquet. "What happened?" Hannah demanded. The other soldier, a young British spotter named Cole, looked pale and stunned. "Explosion, ma'am. Vehicle hit something. Didn't register on sensors." "Improvised?" she asked. He shook his head. "Range mines, but those were supposed to be blanks." Harris's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Captain, we've got a problem. Range control confirms no live munitions authorized." Hannah's gut tightened. That meant one thing. Someone had switched the protocols. Vega worked quickly, blood soaking his gloves. "Arteries torn, I need evac." "Negative," Hannah said. "Signal's dead, stabilize him here." He glanced up. "He's got 10 minutes before shock." "Then you've got 9 to stop the bleeding." Her tone was calm, clipped. Not cold, focused. The way her father's had been the night she learned how to shoot through a storm. She scanned the wreck again. The pattern didn't look like an accident. C-shaped blast arc, directional charge, precision placed. Not a system error, a message. By the time Harris rejoined her, his face was grim. Confirmed sabotage. Someone overrode safety protocols from inside the control network. How recent? Within the last hour. She looked at the burning horizon. They wanted this to happen during the live integration drill. Who? "That's what we're going to find out," she said quietly. They airlifted the wounded soldier 30 minutes later. Vega's hands were steady, his face unreadable. The others stood silent as the rotor wash whipped dust around them. Hannah watched the helicopter vanish into the glare, her expression carved from stone. When the sound faded, she turned to the group. "Until further notice, all training halts. No one moves outside visual contact. Gear down, weapons safe." Harris frowned. "You're shutting down the whole program." "I'm locking it down," she corrected, "until we know who we're dealing with." Back at the base, the atmosphere had shifted. The easy rhythm of unity had fractured into tension again. Whispered questions, sidelong glances, fear hiding behind professionalism. Davenport confronted her outside the operations tent. "What the hell happened out there?" "Sabotage," she said. He stepped closer, jaw tight. "You're telling me someone planted live explosives under a joint training vehicle on a secure range?" "I'm telling you, someone wants this program to fail." His eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting an insider." "I'm not suggesting," she said evenly. "I'm certain." He looked at her for a long moment. "You think it's me?" "I think whoever did it knows how we operate, and you've been the loudest voice against integration." Anger flashed across his face, pride and guilt tangled. "I may disagree with your methods, Captain, but I don't kill my own." "Good," she said quietly. "Then help me prove it." That disarmed him, more than accusation ever could. An hour later, the investigation began. Every system log, every access terminal, every data packet combed line by line. Pearson arrived mid-analysis, his suit still immaculate despite the chaos. "Status?" he asked. Hannah handed him a tablet. "Remote access breach, localized to internal terminal Delta 6. Encryption is old school, analog bridge to digital node. Whoever did this knew the infrastructure." Pearson scanned the data, his jaw tightening. "You're right, this wasn't random. Someone wanted a casualty." Harris looked up. "Why?" "Because success threatens someone," Hannah said. "And if this program works, that someone loses control." Pearson's gaze hardened. "Then you'd better find them before command does. Once they get involved, this turns political." Hannah nodded, understood. Night fell heavy. The range lights burned white against the desert dark. Hannah sat alone in the operations tent, the hum of equipment filling the silence. She watched the data scroll, cross-referencing logs, aligning timestamps. Nothing, every trace led nowhere. Until one anomaly blinked at the bottom of the screen, a manual access override. Time-stamped 3 minutes before the blast. User ID, R. Carter. Her breath stopped. She leaned closer, heart suddenly cold. The file's signature repeated old, archived credentials, her father's. For a moment, everything in her went still. Then she exhaled slowly. "That's not possible." Harris entered just then. "Any luck?" She turned the screen toward him. His face changed instantly. That's... I know, she said. He hesitated. Could it be someone using his ID? It has to be. His credentials were purged years ago. Maybe someone found an old access key. Or maybe, she said softly, someone wants me to think they did. Her reflection in the screen looked like someone else, haunted, focused, unblinking. By midnight she was still awake, still searching. The camp outside had gone silent. Harris reappeared with a thermos. You should rest. She shook her head. I can't. He studied her for a moment. You think this is connected to your father's death, don't you? She didn't answer right away. I think the same people who buried his operation might not be finished. He sat beside her. You're chasing ghosts. Maybe, but ghosts leave data trails. She looked back at the screen, her voice barely above a whisper. He used to say the truth doesn't disappear, it just hides behind better lies. Harris leaned forward. Then we tear the lies down. She met his eyes, and for the first time that day, something softened in her expression. Gratitude, trust, maybe even hope. At 300, she found it, buried in encrypted archives linked to pre-merger range testing. A file labeled Silent Horizon, declassified draft. Her father's operation. Her pulse slowed. She opened it carefully, layer by layer, until the final image loaded. A grainy photo of the same blast pattern from today. Identical curvature, identical damage. Her father's death wasn't a system glitch. It was sabotage, the same signature, the same pattern. She sat back, staring at the screen. The weight of years pressed into her chest. They repeated it, she whispered. They brought it here. Harris looked stunned. Who would have that data? Only someone with top-level clearance. Pearson, he asked. She shook her head slowly. No, he's too careful, too public. Her mind raced. Who had both motive and access? Who had fought her every step? And then she knew. The next morning she requested a private meeting with Davenport. He looked exhausted, not guilty, just old, worn by too many days of pride turned heavy. You asked to see me, he said, closing the tent flap behind him. She slid the image across the table. Recognize this. He frowned. Explosion pattern today. No, 10 years ago. Silent Horizon. His eyes widened. That operation was classified. So was this program, she said, until someone tried to repeat it. He sat down slowly, realization dawning. You think someone from Horizon sabotaged this range? Not someone from Horizon, she said softly. Someone who survived it. His gaze met hers. Who? She hesitated, then spoke the words that had been burning in her chest all night. Major Ellis, your former commanding officer. Davenport froze. Ellis is retired. He was, Hannah said, until last year, defense contractor, tech consultant for Sentinel Systems, the same company supplying our targeting algorithms. Color drained from his face. You're saying? I'm saying he built this test to fail, and he used you to defend it. Silence filled the tent, thick and suffocating. Finally Davenport whispered, My God, he trained me. Hannah's tone softened. Then you know how dangerous he is. Outside, the wind picked up harsh, whistling through the wires like a warning. Harris entered, eyes wide. Captain, incoming transmission, encrypted. She took the tablet, the message displayed in cold digital text. Cease investigation, or more will die. The signature was unmistakable. Hannah looked up, her expression hardening. He's watching. Harris's jaw tightened. Then he's close. Closer than we think, she said quietly. Her gaze moved toward the far horizon where the mountains bled into dust. Somewhere out there, the man who'd taken her father's life was still pulling strings. And now he'd made it personal. That night, as the camp lights flickered against the endless dark, Hannah sat outside alone. The desert stretched cold and infinite, the stars burning with merciless clarity. She thought of her father's words again, the last thing he'd said before that final mission. The shot you take isn't what defines you, Hannah. It's the ones you don't. She closed her eyes, the wind brushing her face like memory. Tomorrow she would have to choose between orders and truth, between the mission she'd been given and the one she owed. Because sometimes silence wasn't survival. Sometimes silence was surrender. And she'd promised herself she would never surrender again. Why did betrayal always sound like silence? By sunrise, the base was awake but hollow, radios muted, engines idling, everyone pretending the world was still under control. Hannah stood in the operations bay, watching the desert turn gold. Orders were coming. She could feel them before they hit the comms: containment, inquiry, deferral. The usual words for burying truth. She didn't wait. "Captain," Harris said behind her, voice low, "you're thinking about going after him, aren't you?" She didn't answer immediately. She slipped her sidearm into the holster, adjusted the strap on her pack. "If I wait for permission, he disappears. Command won't like that. They didn't like my father asking questions either." He hesitated. "Then at least let me come with you." Her eyes softened, but her tone didn't. "If this goes wrong, someone has to keep them from rewriting what happened. Stay here. Guard the data." He frowned. "And if you don't come back?" She gave a faint, weary smile. "Then make sure they remember why I left." 2 hours later, the horizon swallowed the convoy behind her. She rode a single tactical ATV, its engine humming low against the wind. The desert stretched endless, indifferent, the kind of silence that could make a person believe they were the last soul alive. Coordinates from the encrypted message traced to an abandoned weather station 70 miles north. Old government property turned ghost site. She kept her eyes on the compass, her hand near the weapon but her mind somewhere else, replaying the look on Davenport's face when she told him about Ellis. The disbelief, the shame. She'd seen that look before, on herself. Years ago, when she realized her father's death had been filed as equipment malfunction. The memory tightened her chest, but she used it. Pain was just focus wearing a disguise. By midday, she reached the station. A skeletal tower rose from the sand, its metal ribs creaking in the wind. No guards, no vehicles, too quiet. She dismounted, drew her weapon, and moved low, her shadow slicing across cracked concrete. The building smelled of rust and dust, and faintly of oil. Recent. She followed it. Down a narrow corridor, past old generator housings. Then a flicker of light, a monitor humming in the dark. Someone had been here, maybe still was. She stepped closer, keeping her weapon angled down but ready. The screen displayed a looping set of coordinates and a string of encrypted data labeled Sentinel Revision, Horizon Protocol. Her pulse slowed. He'd kept everything. She reached for the keyboard. A faint click echoed behind her, metallic, deliberate. She froze. "Still reading data before checking your six," a voice said, dry and older than she remembered. "You never did learn." She turned slowly. Major Ellis stood at the doorway, a rifle in one hand, calm as a man watering his garden. His hair was gray now, his posture still iron straight. The smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. "Major," she said evenly, "or should I say contractor?" He shrugged. "Titles fade, outcomes remain." "You set the charge." He tilted his head. "A test, Captain, of your resolve, and you passed." Her jaw tightened. "You killed a man." "Collateral," he said it like weather. "Progress demands sacrifice." She took a slow step closer. "You said the same thing to my father, didn't you?" That made him pause, just for a breath. Then his smile sharpened. "Ah, so you finally found the file." "I found the truth." He chuckled. "Truth. You think there's truth in this business. There's only necessity. Your father forgot that. He didn't forget, she said. He refused. His eyes flashed, and that refusal cost his team their lives. No, she said, voice steady but low. You did. The wind moaned through the tower above them, a hollow sound that made the silence after it heavier. He raised the rifle slightly. You came all this way for revenge. She shook her head. For closure. Same thing. Not to me. For a long moment, neither moved. Two soldiers separated by time, belief, and 1,000 unspoken memories. Then Ellis said, You're wasting potential, Captain. You could have joined me. We could have built something enduring, systems beyond human failure. She took one step forward, her voice sharp enough to cut through the still air. Systems that kill their own are failures. He sighed. Idealism, just like your father. Do you know why he died? Because he thought morality could outshoot mathematics. She leveled her weapon slowly. And do you know what he proved? That morality still pulls the trigger when the math says don't. He fired first. The shot cracked against the concrete pillar beside her, shattering dust and silence. She dove behind a crate, heart calm, mind calculating. The sound told her everything. Suppressed .308, 20 rounds max, maybe fewer if he'd carried light. She waited for the reload pause, half a heartbeat, then rolled, firing once. The bullet struck metal near his shoulder, spinning him sideways. He dropped behind a console, grunting. You can't kill what the system created, he shouted. I don't need to, she replied. I just have to end it. Another exchange, 2-3 rounds. Sparks lit the shadows. Then nothing. She moved slow, breath measured, steps soundless. When she rounded the corner, he was gone. A faint creak above the ladder to the tower. She followed. The wind hit hard at the top, cold, sharp, relentless. Ellis stood near the edge, one arm bleeding, rifle dangling at his side. He looked out over the endless desert, the horizon glowing with dying sunlight. You don't see it yet, he said quietly. Everything you're doing, this integration nonsense, it'll crumble. People need control, not unity. Control built on fear, she said, approaching. It always ends the same. He turned, smiling again. And yet you still obeyed it until now. She stopped a few feet away. I obeyed purpose, you obeyed profit. He studied her for a long time, then lowered his weapon slightly. Your father said the same thing before I pulled the override. The words hit like a blow. For a second the world tilted. The desert, the tower, the years between, all collapsing into one instant of clarity. Her voice was quiet, but it carried like a gunshot. You killed him. Ellis's face didn't change. I ensured continuity. She took a step forward, her gun steady. Continuity ends now. He lifted the rifle again, but slower, weaker. The old arrogance faltered. You can't. The report of her weapon echoed across the ridge. One clean shot. He fell backward, the wind catching him as he dropped, silent, weightless, gone. For a moment she didn't move. The wind roared around her, tugging at her hair, her uniform, her breath. She looked down at the spot where he'd been. The silence that followed wasn't victory. It was relief that hurt. She holstered her weapon, turned toward the horizon and whispered, It's over, Dad. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. It was never over, not for people like her. By nightfall, she'd sent coordinates and confirmation to Harris. He arrived 2 hours later with a small team and no questions. The body was recovered, the data secured. Pearson showed up just before dawn, his suit now dusted with sand. He studied her silently. You went off book. Yes, sir. You disobeyed direct protocol. Yes. He nodded once. And you ended a threat that's been buried for a decade. Her eyes met his. That wasn't why I went. I know, he said softly, but it's why I'm letting it go. He handed her a sealed envelope. Orders from Joint Command. You're cleared for temporary leave, effective immediately. She took it but didn't open it. They'll write it as an operational loss. They always do, he said, but some truths don't need paperwork. Back at camp, Harris found her standing by the fence line, watching the sky turn pale with morning. You okay? He asked quietly. She smiled faintly. You ever notice how the wind always feels cleaner after a storm? He nodded. You think it's over? She looked at the horizon. No, but it's quieter. He handed her a small envelope, her father's photo, cleaned, laminated. Found this in your locker. Figured you want it back. She took it gently. Thank you. He hesitated. You know, Command's going to make you the face of this integration program now. Hero, symbol, all that. Let them, she said, just as long as they remember what we lost to earn it. He gave a small laugh. You really hate attention, don't you? Attention fades, she said softly. Integrity doesn't. When he left, she stayed a while longer, the photograph in her hand. The sun rose slow and golden, painting the dunes in light. She thought of her father's last words, of the lessons buried under silence and orders and loss. Then she whispered, to the wind, to the memory, to the ghost that had finally found rest. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She folded the photograph, tucked it into her vest, and turned toward the camp. The wind followed her, not loud, not cold, just steady. Like the kind of truth that never needed proof. And for the first time in years, Hannah Carter felt something close to peace. Why did victory feel so much like guilt? 3 days after the desert, the facility no longer sounded alive. The echo of boots in the corridor had been replaced by the whisper of paper, reports, debriefs, signatures. Everyone was still working, but no one was speaking about what had happened, not on record. Hannah sat alone in the temporary barracks, uniform pressed, hair tied back, expression neutral. The photo of her father lay face down on the table beside her. She had learned long ago that pictures looked heavier when someone else was gone. A knock. Captain Carter, a voice said, the board is ready. She rose. The walk to the hearing room felt longer than any march she'd ever done. The air smelled of antiseptic and formality. 2 guards opened the double doors and she stepped into a room full of eyes that knew how to measure a person. The tribunal wasn't theatrical. No flags, no raised voices. Just 5 officers seated behind a table, a recording clerk, and silence so sharp it could cut skin. Colonel Matthews sat at the center. Pearson was to his right, unreadable. Captain Carter, Matthews began, this inquiry concerns your unauthorized operation on October 14th, resulting in the death of Major Ellis and the termination of Sentinel oversight assets. Do you understand the charge? Yes, sir. State your actions. I pursued a verified hostile actor responsible for the sabotage of Allied property and personnel. Engagement occurred at Grid N41. Threat was neutralized. Without authorization. Yes, sir. The colonel's fingers tapped once on the table. Why didn't you call it in? Because calling it in would have warned him. The room stayed silent for a beat too long. Then one of the foreign officers spoke, accent clipped. You assumed full authority for lethal force. I accepted responsibility for it, she corrected. They questioned for hours, timelines, forensics, motive. Every word was precise, every pause calculated. She answered each without deflection, neither defending nor apologizing, just truth laid bare and cold. When they finally dismissed her to deliberate, she walked out into the sunlight, blinking hard. The desert outside was blindingly bright, the kind of light that exposes everything. Harris was waiting near the steps. How bad? Could go either way. He studied her face. You don't sound worried. I'm not, she said softly. Worry doesn't change verdicts. He handed her a small metal tin. Coffee, Figured you'd need something real. She smiled faintly. You always know what battlefield I'm on. That evening they called her back. Matthews read the verdict slowly, the way someone reads a truth he doesn't like but still believes in. Captain Hannah Carter, findings. Engagement deemed justified under exigent threat clause. Command protocol violated but actions prevented further loss of life and compromise of Allied systems. Recommendation. Commendation withheld, record sealed, assignment classified. He looked up. In plain language, Captain, you're cleared, but you'll carry this one alone. She nodded once, understood. Dismissed. Outside, the sky was bruised purple with sunset. Harris caught up to her halfway across the courtyard. Cleared. Cleared enough. He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. They'll write you out of the story, you know. Good, she said. Stories make heroes. I just wanted the truth. He hesitated. What now? She looked toward the horizon. They'll reassign me, probably somewhere quiet. Observation detail, training program, something that doesn't exist on paper. You'll take it. She nodded. Some jobs are punishment and purpose at the same time. The following week passed in silence. Teams disbanded, tents came down, the desert reclaimed the ground where arguments and gunfire had once echoed. On her final night, Hannah walked the perimeter alone. The fences were half dismantled, the range lights dark. She stopped at the ridge where she had first proved the impossible shot. The wind came from the west, warm, constant. She closed her eyes and listened. Respect the wind, Hannah. Her father's voice wasn't memory anymore. It was muscle memory, part of her breathing. She knelt, pressed her palm into the sand, and whispered, "We got him." For the first time since she'd arrived, the desert felt like it exhaled. At dawn, Pearson found her loading a transport case, heading out early. Figured I'd leave before the paperwork starts. He handed her a folder. You're being transferred to the Advanced Training Division, Black Range Facility, advisory role. They want you to teach cross-discipline fundamentals. She raised an eyebrow. Teach? I'm not exactly a classroom type. That's why they want you. Students remember scars more than speeches. She took the folder, but her eyes stayed on him. And if I say no? Then they'll send someone else who believes technology doesn't lie. That got a small smile out of her. Then I guess I'm teaching. He nodded once. For what it's worth, Captain, you did the right thing. She studied him carefully. You ever notice how people only say that when they're glad someone else did it? Pearson's mouth twitched. Maybe, but history needs quiet soldiers, be one of them. When he left, she stood watching his silhouette fade into the dust. Quiet soldier. Maybe that was all she ever wanted to be. 2 weeks later, Black Range. New facility, new faces, same wind. The recruits stared at her with the mix of awe and disbelief she'd once seen in others. The legend had outrun the truth again. They whispered about the shot that rewrote doctrine, about the woman who'd outshot the machines. She ignored it. She set the rifles on the bench and spoke without raising her voice. Technology will lie to you. Wind will never. Learn to tell the difference. Silence followed, respectful, uncertain. Then one student asked, "Ma'am, what do we do if both fail?" Hannah looked at him for a long time. Then you trust your gut and live with it. That became the lesson of the week. Nights at Black Range were quieter. She lived in a small cabin overlooking miles of sand and sky. No alarms, no reports, just the whisper of desert wind against glass. Sometimes Harris would call from his new posting. Quick updates, small jokes, nothing heavy. Sometimes Davenport would send a terse email, program stabilized, teams improving. No apology, just acknowledgement, that was enough. But mostly she sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, staring at the horizon. The stars out here didn't twinkle, they burned steady like they learned endurance. She thought of her father often, not the soldier, The man who'd once told her that strength wasn't loud. It was the quiet decision to keep showing up. Courage, he'd said, isn't pulling the trigger, it's facing the recoil. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel it. The weight of the rifle, the weight of the past, the recoil that didn't end when the shot stopped echoing. Months passed. The new trainees grew sharper, calmer. She watched them learn how to breathe before they fired, how to see before they trusted. And every time one of them hit a target by instinct instead of algorithm, she smiled just a little. One evening, Harris showed up unannounced, his truck coated in dust. "Heard you're turning recruits into philosophers," he said, grinning. "Only the good ones." They sat on the porch watching the sun drop. For a long while neither spoke. Then he asked quietly, "You ever think about going back to the field?" He nodded. "Every day," she said, "but some fights need distance. Perspective makes aim cleaner." He looked at her. "You still blame yourself." "For what?" "For surviving." She took a slow breath. "Sometimes, but then I remember who didn't, and I try to make it mean something." He nodded, eyes on the horizon. "Guess that's all any of us can do." When he left that night, she watched the taillights fade into the dark. The desert went still again, waiting. She whispered almost to herself, "You were right, Dad. Fundamentals never lie." She closed the door, the sound soft, final. Outside, the wind rose and fell, carrying the faint echo of a rifle shot that had traveled farther than anyone thought possible, 3,200 meters, and a lifetime of silence. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the stars burned a little brighter, as if they finally understood her kind of peace. Why do legends always end in whispers? Months had turned into seasons at Black Range. The sun still rose fierce and unmerciful over the dunes, but inside the training fields there was rhythm now, steady voices, measured breath, rifle bolts sliding in sync. The recruits had learned what she came to teach: patience, respect, silence. Every morning, Hannah Carter walked the perimeter before class. It wasn't ritual, it was remembrance. Each gust of wind across the sand sounded like the echo of all the shots fired before, hers, her father's, every soul who'd ever aimed for something they could barely see. She stopped sometimes at the far ridge where the wind cut clean and the horizon shimmered. From there, she could see everything the world wanted to forget: the test range, the buried towers, the scars of explosions long cooled by time. That morning felt different. The air carried a hush, like the calm before something inevitable. Inside the main hall, the recruits waited, 30 faces, young and sharp. Their eyes followed her as she entered. The room smelled of oil and sand, familiar as breath. She set her field notes on the table. "Today's lesson is the last one," she said. Murmurs rippled. Some looked surprised, others anxious. "You've learned the math," she continued. "The angles, the wind, the heart rate, the breathing. You know how to pull a trigger without flinching. But what I need to teach you now isn't about shooting." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "It's about why you shoot." No one moved. "When you pull that trigger, someone's world changes forever. Maybe yours, maybe theirs. The bullet isn't the story, the decision is. So before you ever take the shot, you ask yourself one question: what will this mean when the echo stops?" Her voice softened. "If you can't answer, you don't fire." The room stayed silent long after she finished. Then one of the younger soldiers, a girl who reminded her of herself, asked quietly, "Ma'am, does the echo ever really stop?" Hannah smiled faintly. "No, you just learn to live in rhythm with it." That evening, after the last student left, she sat alone at the shooting platform. The sun had slipped low, burning orange across the dunes. A single rifle lay in front of her, the same model she'd used on the range, now weathered by time. She chambered one round, not for target practice, just to feel the weight. She aimed at nothing, exhaled slowly and whispered, "For him." She didn't fire, she didn't need to. Later, Harris arrived, dusty from travel. He had new scars, new stories. "Heard command wants you to brief a joint task force next month," he said, grinning. "Guess your quiet life, over." She shook her head. "Briefing, not command. I'm just teaching them how not to make the same mistakes." He leaned on the railing beside her. "Funny thing, people only call it wisdom after you survive it." She smiled. "Then maybe survival's the best degree you can earn." They stood in silence for a while, watching the desert fade into night. "You ever miss it?" he asked. "The field." He nodded. "Sometimes," she said, "but missing isn't the same as belonging. I think I finally belong here." He studied her face. "You really let it go." She looked at the horizon. "Not let go, learn to carry it without bleeding." The days grew shorter, the air cooler. Training cycles ended, new ones began. And the story of the woman who made the 3,200-meter shot spread farther than she ever wanted it to. Magazines called it legendary, analysts called it impossible, soldiers called it hope. She called it memory. Sometimes she'd hear the recruits whispering when they thought she couldn't hear. They say she never missed again. They say she saw the wind. She never corrected them. Legends were just truths wearing better clothes. Let them keep theirs. One night, long after lights out, she sat writing her final report for command. Her handwriting was clean, unhurried. Objective achieved. Cross-national integration successful. Technology protocols revised for manual override. Training model established. Human instinct prioritized. Moral precision begins with empathy. She stopped there, pen hovering, then added one more line. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She signed it quietly, the way her father used to sign mission logs, initials only. Then she closed the notebook and placed it in the outgoing file box. A week later the letter came. Unmarked envelope, no insignia. She opened it carefully. "Captain Carter, Joint Command requests your presence for classified consultation. Coordinates attached. Pearson." She folded the letter once, set it aside, and stared at it for a long time. The desert wind whispered through the half-open door. She didn't move. When Harris stopped by that evening, she handed him the note. "They're calling me back." He read it, then met her eyes. "You going?" She nodded once. "One last mission." He sighed. "And after that?" She smiled faintly. "After that, maybe I finally get to rest." 2 nights later, she was gone. No send-off, no ceremony, just the distant growl of an engine fading into the dawn. For weeks, no one heard from her. Official channels said nothing. The trainees whispered theories, promotion, exile, worse. Then, months later, a small parcel arrived at Black Range addressed to Instructor Carter's successor. Inside was a single spent casing, polished to a dull gold. On the base, etched by hand. 3200M wind, steady. No note, no explanation. Harris held it in his palm for a long time before setting it on the shelf above her old desk. He didn't speak. Some stories don't need telling. Years passed. The world changed as it always does. New wars, new peace treaties, new weapons that promised precision without conscience. But somewhere in every sniper school, every training hall, instructors still repeated her name when they spoke about the fundamentals. "She hit 3,200 meters like a legend," they'd say. "But that's not why we remember her." And if you listened closely, you could almost hear the next line carried on the wind. "We remember her because she never forgot why she pulled the trigger." The desert never forgot her either. On quiet mornings when the wind swept low across the dunes, it carried echoes that sounded almost human. A faint click, a breath, the soft recoil of a memory refusing to die. Some swore they'd seen her silhouette out there, standing on the ridge at dawn, watching the horizon through a scope she no longer needed. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe it was the desert remembering its best student. Either way, the legend lived, not in headlines or statues, but in the quiet discipline of those who came after. Every time someone slowed their breath before a shot, every time they trusted instinct over algorithm, her lesson lived again. Because what she taught wasn't marksmanship, it was humanity. Voiceover soft, steady, like wind across glass. They called it the impossible shot, 3,200 meters, but distance was never the challenge. It was belief, believing in yourself when systems fail, believing in silence when the world is loud. We all carry a target inside us, doubt, guilt, the past. Some of us spend our lives trying to hit it clean. Maybe that's what redemption really is, a long-range shot that finally lands. Pause, the sound of wind rising. And if you ever find yourself alone on some quiet ridge, remember her. The soldier who didn't chase glory, only clarity. The woman who turned failure into proof and loss into direction. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The camera pans back, wide shot of endless desert, sunlight breaking over dunes, the faint glint of a rifle casing half buried in sand. The wind carries one last echo, distant and pure, a single shot rolling toward the horizon until it fades into quiet. Fade to black.